There's tens of thousands of pounds worth of computers in here for the graphics, the geospheres, the GPS. It's our technological epicentre. And over here is a grown man in a sandpit. Stewart, what are you mucking about at?
I don't think I've ever been described as being a grown man before, Tony. What I'm trying to do is build up a model of this flat battery up on top of this hill. And what we know at the moment is we've got a 20mm gun battery and we've got the blast bank around what appears to be a building down here. By the time we've finished, we'll be able to plot all the buildings, all the trenches, all the earthworks and get a full impression of this site without that woodland that's there today.
The one thing that's really obvious to me here is that we've got all this war apparatus around this bit, and you've got a load here as well. But here, in the middle, you've got, what is that, a field of hay?
Yeah, it is. It's bizarre, isn't it? Because there's a shortage of food on the island, gun batteries actually had to have their own farms inside them to grow potatoes, to grow hay, because they used horses a lot to transport things around. They're actually acting as farmers as well as gunners.
One more question. What did you do to your finger?
First casualty, I'm afraid. It's got a lot to do with that.
Landscape surveying is obviously more dangerous than I thought. Stewart, do me a favour. Tell me our moat isn't a cattle enclosure.
Well, the problem with any ditch that turns a corner, the bank with it, historically people think of moats, and moats they associate with medieval manors and so on, but that could be the corner of any type of enclosure. It could be a corner of a Roman fort or fortlet, could be something like a medieval moat, it could be a cattle enclosure. But we've got to remember that just beyond that set of trees up there, there's a fine manor house. And so we've got to take those trees away and perhaps see in this field that we're part of the landscape that goes with that manor house over there.
So to work out what's going on in the field, we need to find out as much as we can about the house. While the hunt for the Tudor building continues, we're also looking for evidence of a monastic settlement around the church. We still want to find it. Stewart thinks he has an idea of where it could have been.
See down below us where the trench is?
Yeah.
That's cut across a line of a ditch which goes straight up there and leads straight towards the churchyard.
So it's going beyond the churchyard wall down there?
Well, I would suspect so. You can't see any trace of it in the churchyard.
No.
But it actually comes along from there, down below us,
Yeah.
heads towards that pylon there in the distance. But it does a right angle across the field there.
You see where that greener grass is across there?
It's just a bit beyond that. There's actually quite a dip when you get down there.
Right.
And then on the aerial photograph and in the earthworks, you can actually see a ditch heading down towards the river. You see where the low ground is, down there?
Yeah.
Well, that's where there's a series of fish ponds now, probably to do with the manor house.
See the bottom of the slope in front of us?
It is, but what that dip is and why they've used it as fish ponds is because it's an old river channel coming through there.
Ah, right.
So that might be the sort of former edge of the river in the Saxon period. So I think what this monastic enclosure is doing is it's coming along here, doing a right angle, heading down to the river.
Yeah.
Potentially where it is over that side, obviously the church is there, which you'd expect
You'd expect that to be in it, wouldn't you? Yeah. Yeah.
And to me, it looks as if the other edge of it is going to be where the village is separated from.
So where the big hedges and the big trees is where it's getting back towards the river again.
That's right. I mean, it's almost like the field that we're in.
Yeah.
Apart from a small bit at that far end, is the monastic enclosure. It gives you that that sense of isolation that I know you like with monasteries.
Well, that's right. Yeah, it's almost on a promontory sticking eastwards, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah, that's absolutely ideal.
This is the area described by Stewart. It's the edge of the monastic enclosure, with the church inside it and the edge of the village forming one side to it. It's a huge site, but entirely what one might expect. But a ditch isn't the most exciting thing in the world, is it?
Well, when it comes to Saxon ditches in the pre-Viking period, yes, there's only three things you tend to get them round. A royal centre, a trading centre or a monastery. So it can only be one of these three things.
And what we're looking for here is a monastery, so it seems to fit.
What do you reckon the significance of that ditch is?
Well, I think it's fantastic. It could be the vallum round the edge of a monastic enclosure.
What's a vallum?
It's a big ditch which defines the religious area from the world outside. Yeah. It's fantastic.
Why do you say that?
Because it's big, it's broad, it's exactly the sort of thing you expect to find, and you can trace it in earthwork form going down there and going back that way, heading back towards the church. So I think it's fantastic.
Stewart, After 12 years on Time Team, even I know that is not Saxon archaeology.
Well, that's a phase of Saxon you've never seen before.
What were you doing here?
Well, what we've got here is a series of regular earthworks. There's a regular layout of them, which we're interested in. We want to know what they were. And there's a piece of wall exposed. Can you see that there?
Yeah, yeah.
So we put a trench here to see what it was. And look, we've got this really well-built brick wall. It's got what appear to be Tudor bricks in it. And it's just sitting there.
What do you think it might be?
Well, we've actually put another hole in over there.
Yeah.
And we've got lots of building rubble, tile, all the debris from a collapsed building. I think we've probably got here an unknown Tudor building, which I knew absolutely nothing about before.
The front wall runs from here to here. The earthworks in the orchard suggest that it extended right back to here. And the thickness of the walls suggests that it was a couple of stories high. It was a prestigious place. Stewart took me on a tour of the front of it. If I'm a visitor to the Tudor house, why am I coming up this way rather than from the road?
Well, this is where the privileged visitors would arrive, the high status visitors. You wouldn't want to come in past all the peasants, basically.
So what can I see over here?
You'd see ornamental ponds, little waterscape just out there you can walk round.
And over there?
In this enclosure here, you'd have trees, ornamental orchard-type trees, and they'd be screening what was the old moat. By the time you got to this point here, what you'd see in front of you is this grand facade of this new Tudor house.
So presumably that's the whole point of the grand walk-up.
It is. It's showing off. It's showing off to you as a visitor. This is its display side over here.
And if you look out from the house...
Well, what you've got looking this way is an open landscape.
It's a hell of a view, isn't it?
It is. It's private and it's privileged. You can't see the village, you can't see the peasants. You've got ponds, river, open landscape, orchards, ornamental gardens. Very show-off, very Tudor.
And this is what this enormous complex would have looked like. This was an impressive building dominating the landscape, with its own entrance to the church and to the river.
That's one of the more recent maps, but if you go back...
At the incident room, Stewart and Henry are working out how all the leats connect to understand the layout of the site.
Looking at these deep valleys that come down the side, the water from them's got to go somewhere. And that boundary around the back is interesting, because on the old map, that looks like another leat, a water system that we haven't even looked at yet, round the back.
If they can find the earliest leat, it could lead to the very origins of this site. OK, after 3 days' excavation, are we in a position to say whether or not there was a medieval manor anywhere on this site before this one?
Yes, we are in a position to say that.
And what's the answer?
No, there wasn't.
You've not even seen any background manuring on the fields you get when privies are cleared out and they chuck the stuff on the land. We've not got any of that.
Which rather begs the question, why did they build this place on a greenfield site?
I don't know what we're going to do.
So, with geophysics somewhat kiboshed by the vegetation, we're going for the old-fashioned approach. Our first trench over a possible gun emplacement has gone in based on the aerial photograph and Stewart's surveying skills. And he's already given us a position for a second trench.
There's a whole series of structures here that look as if they're buildings associated with the emplacement that Phil's working on. And this might be where the crews look after the gun, as it were. This is where people might actually be living. We're not expecting anything big and concrete. It's not a bunker type of building. It might even be just a timber building.
The way you're talking, you've actually got very excited about this site.
I love it. It's like just wandering into woodland and suddenly finding all these things above ground.
But if you've got that aerial photograph, do we actually need to do a great deal of archaeology?
Well, we do, because this was taken in 1944. They could have put all sorts of other things here which wouldn't even be on this aerial photograph.
So our first trench can confirm that this earthwork is a 20mm gun emplacement, and it was strategically placed to shoot down low-flying aircraft.
Phil's emplacement up on the top here, on the highest point, that's a 20mm gun. That's designed to be quick moving. It's got a rapid rate of fire.
And as we know this shape is a 20mm gun, we can confidently say that all these features are also 20mm guns, which isn't a bad result for one day's digging. But as Stewart's discovered, they were just part of a sophisticated setup to defend the airfield and the island against Allied attack.
The 88s, the bigger ones on this side of the hill, they've got a dual purpose. They've got a 360-degree arc on the sky. You shoot anything up in the sky, as it were. But they're also able to depress their barrels downwards, so they can cover all that area by the airport. And they can actually see right down to the bay at the south.
Then it's these massive enclosures housing 88mm guns that were the cannons.
That's what an 88mm looks like with its crew. It's got an 8-man crew. It sits on a big tripod. You need something about 12 metres wide. And this is an incredibly powerful gun. If we had a gun here, you see the contrails in the sky, people going on their holidays?
Yeah.
They're at 20,000 feet, thereabouts. This gun would bring that down. Wow. That's an incredible gun, is that?
Where are we going to put the trench?
This building here is a command and control centre. That's where Faye's digging.
Yes, right
in that
behind
trench
us, that
down
trench.
there. Yeah.
So with all this information, what does our man in the sandpit think?
Because we've excavated around 20mm battery, you know what that's like. We can see others on the aerial photograph.
Yep.
And we've got a number of them ringing around the site. The 88mm ones are square. They're very different to the 20mm ones. There's a nice triangular pattern of 3 there.
Yeah.
And over in where we're standing, nice triangle geometric pattern. So you can imagine, if they're firing at 15 rounds a minute, that's 45 rounds from each of these batteries a minute, times 2, 90 rounds a minute. These batteries can pump up into the sky. That's serious air defence, is that. But you can see how they just went from being an anti-aircraft battery suddenly to having to think almost in infantry mode. This is the weakest side. They're expecting attacks up here, and you can see they're also, in this trench system, they're digging a trench along the back of the hedge line now, and they're going to use the hedge and the bank underneath it as part of the defences against any attack here. It's not just anti-aircraft, it's about controlling the airfield, and it's an anti-invasion defence at the same time.
So we've got a fortified enclosure as sophisticated as any Iron Age hill fort, with 6 massive guns capable of throwing up a barrage of exploding shells, while 20mm gun emplacements dealt with lower flying aircraft. But by the end, it was a fortress where starving troops lived in fear of invasion, and the 88mm guns, including the one in Phil's trench, were now lowered to overlook the island below. But Stewart's on a quest for something earlier again.
Stu, what the heck's going on here?
Well, looking at this 1856 map and the possibility of a northern watercourse going round there, a different watercourse for the pond, that building there on the end of what might be redundant leak, see that there? That looks awfully like there might be a mill building there. And I've had a look round the back, and there's a pit and there's a ditch, and you can see there's walls coming out. So I'm getting to clear the whole lot off and have a decent look at it.
If Stewart has got a mill, it would predate the iron and steel works and could be why industry was attracted here in the first place. Beginning of day 3 here at County Durham, where we've travelled back in time and transformed this rural idyll into a seething mass of industrial activity in the 18th and 19th century. At least we thought we were in the 18th and 19th century, but Stewart reckons he can push the date back even further. What's up his sleeve?
We have mention of a mill, corn mill here in the 16th century, late 16th century. On the first map we've got of the site, a building here which may indicate a mill site, because we've got basically an oak channel coming down here, a little channel down the side of the building. So it's speculative, but I would like to see what's going on in this building.
So this is our causewayed enclosure here, and there's another one here, and one here, and one here, and yet another one here. Yet these are very rare Neolithic phenomenon, and we've got 5 together. Why is that?
Well, I think it was deliberate. I think these are marking the edge, the boundary, of a really important cultural territory.
Cultural, Stuart?
Well, it could be cultural, it could be practical as well, because if you look at this grouping, and they are very close together, They seem to relate to the Valley of the Welland. And if you look at this geological map, over here, all these pretty colours are upland. All this blank yellow out here is fenland, it's bog, it's unpleasant. But all these enclosures occur where the Welland meets the bog, effectively. They're on this zone in between. So I think we've got to look at reasons why they all cluster together.
So are you going to try and tie them all up for us?
Well, I'd like to. I mean, it's a big task. I'm going to go and look at these locations for the causewayed enclosures we know about and see how they relate to the geography, how they relate to each other, see if we can somehow get back to the landscape of the Neolithic.
Stewart is out and about on his tour of the other Neolithic causewayed enclosures in the area.
I'm now to site at Upton, which is about 11 kilometres southwest of the site we're excavating. And here, a causewayed enclosure was recorded in the ploughed field. And the slope that the enclosure is built upon is actually on a slope which tilts down towards the south, out to that valley area down there, which is the valley of the River Nene. This enclosure clearly is designed to be seen from the valley of the River Nene down here and to look over in that direction. I'm at the causewayed enclosure at Eton that was excavated before this gravel quarrying totally destroyed it. And what he found here was a causewayed enclosure actually set in the bend of a river which was out beyond it. You've got to remember, in the Neolithic period, this was floodplain, gravels, water flowing, lots of different stream and river channels, very difficult territory to actually negotiate. This is the best understanding we have of the monument in its landscape at the time.
So it really is quite a lonely situation, surrounded by water channels with only a few dry land approaches to it at most times of the year.
Very much so, yeah. I mean, one of the objectives we set out from here was to try and look at this monument against the background of all these other causeway enclosures. There are 5 in this grouping, which seem quite unusual. If you look at these other enclosures, can you see up at Barham, its visibility is restricted in that direction. Can't see anything in that direction at all, but you can actually see in a cone down to the river. At Uffington, it's exactly the same. See how it collects the river, as it were, in that direction, but there's no visibility that way.
So really, they're all looking down onto sort of waterways, and Etna and Northborough are also in very watery situations, as we've just seen from Henry's reconstruction.
Exactly.
But do you think they're all contemporary, Stuart?
My guess is that they are. I mean, one thing that makes me think that is the commonality of shape. They've all got this very strong oval shape. And what makes it particularly interesting that Northborough's actually got more rings than the others, and that's the furthest east along the Welland. And it just makes me wonder if that's kind of as far as they were reaching out, and this one had specific monumentality that they wanted to implant on the landscape.
With so much happening on this site, Stewart's role in understanding how it fits into the landscape could be crucial, as this area would have looked very different 2,000 years ago.
In the Roman period, we're looking at all this area being the bog right up to the Ermine Street there, along up to that ridge up there, are we, where the church spire is?
That's right. Well, I mean, people say that the fens are flat. They're not, especially on the edge. Lots of hills.
If you can see that, if you come down here, you can see that really clearly where the burials and kilns have been found. I mean, what's interesting when you get down here, can you see the ridge where the burials and so on, how it rises up? It's actually on a piece of high ground amongst this fenland, isn't it? It's standing proud of the land surface. This must have been dry during the Roman period.
Oh, it would have been, yeah, Roman and Saxon period. But of course, the other thing to bear in mind is that we're standing on flood clay. If we'd been back in Roman times, we'd be at least a metre lower down, so those islands would be even more in relief.
It looks like we've now got a distinct period of later Anglo-Saxon activity here, as well as the earlier Roman stuff. And Stewart believes that this Roman industrial site wasn't as isolated as the modern landscape suggests.
This is nice here, Mick. You can see the Ermine Street goes right through Stilton.
That's the old road then.
That's it, and the modern motorway goes round the edge of it.
Yeah.
But there's a routeway that comes from Stilton heading east towards the fen.
Across in this area here then?
That's right, because Stilton looks like a cross shape on the plan.
Yeah, it does, yeah.
One route coming through to the east.
Yeah.
And that potentially gives us a link out to the island where the burials and so on are found.
So you're seeing the islanders on the end of a sort of peninsula sticking out
That's
into
right,
the fen, in
yeah.
fact.
We shouldn't view it as being stuck out in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
It is almost on the end of the fingers of Stilton, spreading out into the fen.
Stuart's also got a theory about our first site. We're still trying to reach a rich layer of archaeology at the confluence of these two ditches. And it's a site Stuart believes is perfect for another link into the Roman trading network.
You've got the Ermine Street, then you've got a lot of dry ground heading down towards the edge of the fen.
Right.
And at the edge of the fen, you've got two streams that come off the high ground that come round Stilton.
Yeah.
They come to a confluence just where the cheese press was found, believe it or not.
Ah, right.
When you get into the Roman period, a major change occurs, and that's obviously Ermine Street whacking its way straight. It's almost like a coastal road up here rather than being inland. Well, you see, what you've got is a road actually coming right out from where Stilton is now, from Ermine Street, along this ridge, which is like a finger pointing out into the mere. So all you then actually need is a little causeway across there and you're onto the island. They've got peat for fueling the kilns, they've got fish, you've got rushes which you need. It's actually a really nice economic unit, and because you're out here on the edge of the marshes, pottery kilns are ideal. It's not going to set fire to your buildings basically and things like that.
Stuart, on the face of it, this looks extremely simple because I've just spotted site of King's Chapel and a big cross. So what's the problem?
It does look pretty obvious, doesn't it? Now, the problem with these crosses, when the map makers were coming round in the late 18th century, they were soldiers. They'd speak to the local vicar or local antiquarian, and he might have said, there was a palace over there, or there was a moat over there, or there was a chapel over there.
And it wasn't that important to them.
No, it wasn't. So that could be one of two things. It could be somebody precisely knew where that was, and that is bang on. Or alternatively, it could be just, it was over in that yard somewhere, and the surveyor just put the cross there.
Tricky.
Stuart's worked out where the cross would be on the modern map.
And it falls firmly in the middle of that timber yard.
So are the buried walls of the chapel under here? Well, Geophys did a radar survey in the timber yard earlier this morning, and they're now ready to look at their results.
The X marked on the map is literally here.
Right in the middle?
Yeah.
That's interesting because we've got no clear target, but there is one in the far corner. And the second target genuinely is in the middle.
As usual, Phil's working incredibly hard for the cause. But is he wasting his time? Stuart's got some news for us.
Whatever you're going to say to us, Stuart, you better say it soon, as you're going to get buried, I think, because the way Phil's going at it there.
Am I right in understanding that you put this trench in on the basis of a deed?
Yeah,
that
a little map in the deeds,
yeah. Supposed to show where the site of the King's Chapel is.
That one, yeah.
This deed, showing site of King's Chapel and the little building there, is actually a straight copy of the 1922 map. Over here, we see a little building.
And in fact, the antiquity sign is in the wrong place.
That's right.
It's in the plot next door.
Over in the lumber yard over there.
Truth.
Hold on, so where it says here, site of King's Chapel, and we've dug in this one.
Yeah, but it's
actually referring to this cross.
It's referring to that cross.
And that's the cross that's in the lumber
they
yard.
didn't put the cross on there, look.
Phil, you're digging in the wrong garden.
We know it was a detached building from the sketch. It was oriented east-west.
It says that on the sketch as well.
And it was about 15 yards by 7, so we know that much.
Yeah.
And we know from the references it was likely to be standing in
1805. A barn standing on the side of the chapel is definitely there in 1805.
Now, this map here is 1806, so it should be on this map, really.
Yeah,
and actually, when you look at the map closely, there are two detached buildings, oriented east-west.
Right.
So
it's
it
one of those.
could be one of those two.
Yeah.
Now,
Right.
one is very close to the church, but it's too small when you measure it. There's another one which is the right size, and that's in this garden here. So logic-wise, we should, if we can, examine both those, but this one looks the better candidate on its size. There are two parts to this reference, which is in 1823. It says, on the site of a small inn, known by the sign of the Red Lion, there we go,
Yeah.
anciently stood the palace of King Ethelred. So suggests there's a palace somewhere in this area. It also says, in the same yard also stood an ancient building, long used as a barn, but said to have been the identical chapel appertaining to the Saxon palace.
Suddenly I hear that Mick and Stewart know a lot more than they're letting on. Oh, you two have got a bone to pick with you.
Oh yeah, why is that?
Have you been holding something back?
Oh, almost certainly from you. We try and keep you in the dark as long as possible, you know that.
What is it?
This on the map.
Supposed site of Ethelred's palace here.
Look! Look, come here! Look! Supposed site of Ethelred's palace.
I thought you'd like that.
We're in day 2. We've been looking for the damn thing for
There is a
hours.
reason we've not told you too much about this. I mean, basically, we're digging over here, on this side of the village. This is right on the other side of the village.
This map was made in 1876. And Stewart reckons it's another example of the map makers recording what the locals thought was in the field, rather than knowing what was actually there. Anyone entering the site back then must have crossed a bridge, because we now know that the moat came around in front of the gatehouse. But the big news today is that Stewart doesn't believe the moat ever completely surrounded the manor house. In fact, he doesn't even think this is a moat.
Well, what do you understand by moat?
Well, there's knights in armour outside and they're trying to get into the house and they can't because there's this big defensive feature.
Yeah, that's the problem I have when it comes to this. Everybody uses the term moat. I mean, I prefer to use the term, at the moment, a water-filled ditch.
Strictly speaking, a moat is a defensive ditch, but Stewart thinks this is designed to impress people rather than keep them out.
This was dug in, say, the late 14th century. People aren't really digging defensive moats in a way, because the nature of the buildings are changing, the nature of the society is changing, and you're starting to get people thinking about decoration and ornamentation and gardens even.
We've been drilling holes into our water-filled ditch and discovered that it's much deeper here compared to where it bends around the site. What's now clear is that this arm of the ditch must have been an extension added in Victorian times, because it doesn't exist on this tithe map drawn in 1840.
So that arm of the moat really potentially only appears between 1840 and 1889.
The strange shape of the ditch shown on the tithe map has got Stewart thinking about the earliest occupation of this site.
I thought I'd try and give you a different perspective on the place, and that's...
Stewart's ready to tell Mandy how important this site was way back in Saxon times. But first, he's got to break the news about the moat.
It wasn't always like that. On the tithe map of 1840, the moat came all the way down like that. I don't know if you like that idea or not, but it's much more interesting. If we move out from here and look at it in the wider landscape, this is footage that we shot from the helicopter yesterday, and the moat, as it were, is in this area here. And you can see as we come away from the site that you're at one end there of a long ridge that comes down here. Can you see?
Yes, it's very clear.
You've got a valley down here and a valley down here.
Which is totally different to what you would think.
It's a very distinct...
realise that,
you don't, do you? Until you get up above it and see it. But
Stewart's keen to point out that this is the real boundary of the manor estate. The house and moat only occupied a small part of it.
The road bends around the edge of the manor, a classic piece of landscape analysis.
But what he's most excited about is that the ditch as recorded on the tithe map is probably Saxon, designed to stop anyone coming along this ridge of higher ground.
This is a classic location for a residence of somebody quite important in the Saxon hierarchy. So there's a very strong chance that under here somewhere is that Saxon residence. So what was the ditch of the Saxon fortification, as it were, was reused in the Middle Ages as a garden feature, as part of the hook court, as it were.
But Stewart's found answers from the Roman landscape. We've got this whole complex of Roman boundaries and ditches and stuff in our field, but is there any evidence of that Roman life still in the landscape today?
It doesn't look it at first shot, as it were. Here's Lincoln down here. Over here we've got Ermine Street, and you can see almost got like a ladder, a very regular layout of parishes. And here around the site, it's almost like crazy paving in comparison. You'd think you'd have no chance of the Roman period landscape surviving in there. And by looking at the maps and their photographs and parish boundaries, what you can pull out from under that is the Roman landscape. There's Ermine Street. There's a Roman road coming northeast out of Lincoln, carries on down here. Clearly underneath there's a kind of a grid pattern of roads and fields within which our site sits. One thing that is really quite striking here is the way these old things come together towards this place called Rand, where there is evidence of a Roman settlement. Now that looks to be like a small market centre where whatever was being produced here at our site will be transported down to Rand and then exchanged, sold, whatever, and then along the Roman road network to Lincoln and beyond.
Hello, my name's John Gator. Time Team is fan-funded by Patreon. This vital support helps us to make new episodes. Joining Patreon gives you access to exclusive interviews, 3D models and masterclasses, plus lots more.